Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today I've come to speak to Gary Heseltine. Now, last time I spoke to you, Gary, you were a serving police detective, and I understand there's been a minor change in your life.
Not just a minor change, it's a major change. I've just recently retired from the police. I finished on the 31st of March, so now for the first time I can devote all of my energies into ufology, which is something I wanted to do for a long time, but circumstances have arisen that has meant that I can bring retirement forward a couple of years, and that's what I've done. So that's what I'm going to do.
We're sitting in your new place of work.
Yes, it's going to be quite bizarre, and I'm still getting used to it. But yeah, this is effectively going to be where I'm going to work from home. Right. And there'll be a number of things that we'll discuss to do with UFOs.
Now then, is it true to say that you were under certain restrictions when you were working as a police officer pertaining to your UFO research?
Yes, I mean I can now reveal which force I belong to, which was the British Transport Police, and I worked for them between 1989 and 2013. Initially, when I began my UFO research in January 2002, I told the force what I was going to do, and I operated without any restrictions whatsoever. However, after about 5 years, the first inklings of interference came in when I was told that I couldn't say what my collar number was, that basically they were beginning to come down and say, look, we don't really want you mentioning which force you belong to. And I would say, well, why? Because I said it's gone all around the world. I'm translated on the internet into many languages. You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
So is this just verbal then, Gary? We don't like you mentioning British Transport Police.
Initially it was verbal, and then in 2008 it took a more dramatic turn, or rather in 2009 it took a more dramatic turn, when the MOD suddenly announced late in 2009 that they were going to close its UFO desk. Now I immediately thought, well, what are they going to do with all the reports that they were going to get? And the majority of those would come from police, through police stations. People ringing into police stations have seen something, they would pass the report to the MOD, which is the system that had kind of operated for nigh on 50 years. And in this day and age, I thought, well, they have to be seen to be professional. You can't just palm people off like maybe had been done in the past. They would have to deal with it professionally. So what were they going to do? So I saw that that was a perfect opportunity to write to all the chief constables of Britain with a view to saying, well, you may not be aware of this because it's probably low down on your priorities, but this has happened and it will have an impact on your force. So what I actually did was I wrote to 38 of the 43 police chief constables and said that I was an off-duty police officer. I said which force I belonged to, and I did that just to say, look, I do know things about data protection and things like the other. I told them that I had an unofficial national database and that I was writing to them in an unofficial capacity. And basically I was drawing their attention to the fact that the MOD had closed its desk and they were going to have people ringing in, and that they needed to have some kind of strategy to deal with it.
So just to interrupt you there, Gary, so if someone came into a police station and said, I've just seen a massive UFO, what would then happen? Would that eventually trickle its way up to the MOD then?
It should do. I mean, I would say the majority would have probably come via telephone rather than somebody going in, but yes, that is a possibility. But basically whoever dealt with it, whichever police officer or whichever civilian control room operator dealt with it, they should have then recorded it on a form, a questionnaire form which was supplied to them by the MOD. They would fill in the form and then they would submit that to the MOD within 24 hours, who would then collate them. Now,
so a lot of these reports would have a police officer's name on them then?
The person who was submitting the report, obviously, yes. How it's transpired is that through the Freedom of Information Act, this ongoing release of documents, all the actual names are taken out for public release. But at the time it went in, if Mr. Smith came in and did a report, then the PC Smith or whoever dealt with it would put his name to the fact that they've recorded this report from this civilian. They may even take a statement, and then it would be sent off to the MOD for them to do with whatever. That was the standard procedure.
Really?
Now,
so to interrupt you again, Gary, so was that written into some police procedural document that if someone had an unidentified object,
some forces
that it would go to the MOD?
Yeah, it was written into most forces that there was a standard procedure to follow, i.e. they fill in the report and that goes off to the MOD. Because this can be borne out by the fact that in many of the police officer cases that I've researched since and that have come from the Freedom of Information Act, you'll actually have the statement from the officers saying, I wish to bear notice that I'm so-and-so, so-and-so of this force, and on this day I took a statement from a civilian called blah 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 regarding a UFO experience in accordance with blah blah blah, standing order blah blah blah.
So before you go on and explain what happened to you, I just want to ask you, so when the MOD said, nah, we're not taking any more reports, we're not interested in UFO reports anymore, did they inform the various police authorities that they were no longer going to receive any reports, or do you know?
I can't say for definite that they did, but I'm almost certain that they didn't, because when I wrote to the 38 chief constables, within days I got 24 responses from forces saying, oh, thanks very much for bringing this to our attention, we weren't aware, thanks for telling us, and we'll take some strategic planning on it. So they were pleased that I'd done that. Now, so I'm thinking, great, this is, if I was basically asking them that you're still going to get these calls, what you're going to do with the information, please direct them to me as a civilian UFO researcher, and then I can chase up on these reports and investigate later. It struck me as the perfect thing to do. Now, bear in mind I'd had my UFO research going on for a long time. I didn't think I needed to write to inform my own force, the British Transport Police, that I was writing a private letter to a chief constable. You know, it's a private act. You know, how I don't see how it could impact on the force.
So what you're going to say next is you really haven't been allowed to speak about this until now.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, I've not been allowed to speak because effectively it led. Cutting a long story short, it led to me attending what was called a misconduct hearing, which through the police, where I was supposedly bringing the force into disrepute. By the story as told to me was that after I'd written to various chief constables, and everybody accepted that I'd written a private letter and had in that letter said that it was a private act, and by the way I did some research. The problem was that I said I was a member of the British Transport Police, albeit I'm writing a private letter, but if I went into a bank and they said, what job do you do, I'd say I work for the British Transport Police. What is the difference? But essentially what happened was, the story I was given was that my chief constable was then contacted by another chief constable who I'd written to, who ribbed him and ridiculed him, who's this UFO guy that you've got in your force. And because he felt embarrassed, he then sought what I think is unfair retribution. He instructed that I be subject of a misconduct for bringing the force into disrepute, even though I'd written a private letter in a private act.
So, so your chief constable decided...
Got a bit of ribbon.
Got a bit of stick, and therefore decided to discipline you. Now, did your chief constable go to the Home Secretary and ask him if that would be the right thing to do, or do you think he just did it of his own volition, or...?
I can only speculate. I think he did it off his own back, but I can't say it for certain. But basically, he contacted my North East Area Commander, who pulled me into his office and said, these letters, the chief constable's had a bit of ribbon and he felt a bit embarrassed, therefore we're going to institute misconduct hearings against you. So basically, cutting a long story short, what was a 12-month process, and eventually I'm found guilty because I did say I was a member of the BTP. The fact that I was off duty, writing a private letter doesn't really matter to a big organisation, and in the end you can't beat a big organisation.
Right. So that was the crime that you just said that you...
He got embarrassed, so my crime was that he felt that the subject was really one of ridicule,
yes,
and he was being tarnished with ridicule.
But he couldn't use that against you, because lots of people are interested in UFOs. But what he was using was the fact that you said you belonged to the British Transport.
If I hadn't have said in those letters to the Chief Constable that I was also a serving member of the British Transport Police, then I dare say that I wouldn't have been disciplined.
Or he might have found another route.
Whatever.
Right.
But that was the basis, that because I disclosed which force I belonged to, even though it was a private letter, and I was just saying, oh, by the way, I am a police officer, and I did it to kind of counter, to just demonstrate that I was a serious person, and that I did I was a proper serving officer.
So does that is that classed as a verbal warning then?
No, I got a 12-month written warning,
right,
which a year long. It was a year-long process, and in the end, the decision was a 12-month written warning, which is kept on file. And basically, if you do anything in that 12 months, they have the right to then probably sack you.
Right. So when did that 12-month period end?
2010.
Right.
So it effectively ran from 2009 to 2010, and then it was an uncomfortable process. But to my mind, I could never understand it. How could I really bring the force into disrepute? Because it's not as if I was chaining myself to the railings and saying, look, I'm BTP and I believe in UFOs, and doing something ludicrous. All I'd done was ask and verify who I was. I was asking a Chief Constable, so it seemed to me silly not to say, well, I'm also a police officer. Right. And that if I hadn't said which force I belonged to, I'm sure they'd have come and said, which force are you with?
So in that period, you continued to get reports from serving police officers?
Yes, I did, but it just meant that from doing a lot of radio shows and things like that, I just literally had to keep my head down. And when your job is on the line, as it potentially was, and your pension's on the line, then it's a very uncomfortable process that you go through.
So did they say that you weren't allowed to do radio and TV shows?
No, they basically just said, absolutely, you can't say that you're a member of the BTP. You can go on TV, but you can't say which force you belong to.
Right.
But it added impacts, because obviously when in 2012 I did 2 appearances on This Morning, on ITV This Morning, which is a prominent daytime programme, and on the first February show that I was on, I'd made it perfectly clear that they weren't to say which force I belonged to, but they almost did when one of the presenters, the first things he said was, what does your force think about it?
Yes.
Which on live television was not the ideal thing to do, and that could have impacted on me, but unfortunately it didn't. But it was a very, it's one of the decisions that's made me decide to retire early, because I think it was wrong. They will say, well, you admitted guilt. Well, I admit guilt in the sense of that, yes, I did say in that letter that I belong to the BTP. Well, if that's a crime, I argue that it isn't. And the other 2 things that were picked up against me, that I was found guilty of, is that, believe it or not, on my own Proof Force Police database website, which highlights on duty and off-duty sightings, I'd had 2 off-duty sightings, and at the end of each entry, which is a little précis account of each of the reports, I'd forgotten that I'd put 2 entries by myself, 2 off-duty sightings, source Gary Heseltine BTP. They picked up on that because they'd scrutinised my website.
So they've been reading your website?
Oh yeah. Well, it's all in the reports, which I will, what I will say is that because of the amount of material that I've got over the 10 years in terms of sighting reports, I've got more than enough for a book, and hopefully within the next 12 months that book will come out. But what I can say is there will be a full chapter on the discipline aspect.
Just to go back to the question that you're referring to that you were asked on ITV was by Philip Schofield, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And I saw that interview, and I did feel that was a very aggressive...
Shouldn't have been said. It was all worked out.
Unfair, question for him to pose, and I suspect he was given that loaded question to you
I
initially.
suspect somebody in his ear said put him on the spot.
Yeah.
Because if you remember, I went onto that programme with an agenda, and make no bones about this. When I went onto that programme, I was a bit surly. I wanted to get involved in trying to put out a challenge to the mainstream media. Let me show you the evidence, because I do believe that I can show you the evidence on the best cases. And so I deliberately cut in a little bit on Bridget Grant, and basically it's at that point that Schofield came back and put me on the spot, and I had to think on my feet. But it was a big no-no. He shouldn't have done it, and he knew he shouldn't have done it.
So you are a serving police detective constable, and you have started off this this ProForce, haven't you?
ProForce, Police Reporting UFO Sighting.
What do the force think about this?
What do the force think about it? I'm not at liberty to say it.
My attitude, the plan worked, because in the end, the challenge that I put out, they did respond to, in April 2012. I then went back to discuss the Rendlesham Forest case with Chris French.
All right then, Gary, well, we're going to go for the first break, and after the break we might be talking about Nick Pope. RichPlanet TV is coming to a town near you. In May 2013, I will be travelling around the UK, speaking at the following places: Gateshead, Glasgow, Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham, Weston-super, Southampton, Reading and London. I'll be covering recent UFO reports, which is not to be missed, and exposing a range of issues you won't find discussed on mainstream TV. Get ticket details from the richplanet.net website. Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary Heseltine, who is a recently retired police detective. Now then, Gary, last time you were on Rich Planet, we spoke at length about Nick Pope and your attitude towards comments that he had made in the Sun newspaper about the Exopolitics conference. Now, fairly recently, he wrote, what was it, a 6-page...
Oh, no, it was an 8-page pullout.
8-page pullout in the Sun newspaper, all about the UFO subject. For me, it almost pains me to say this, it was a reasonably positive article, which just demonstrates the schizophrenia towards this subject in the mainstream media. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think, yeah, it's, I mean, for something in the mainstream media that is largely still ridiculed, when you have an 8-page pullout, which obviously has cost implications, pages printed off, ink, etc., and doing it in Britain's leading, most popular newspaper, then that's a major piece. And like you say, it was on the whole very pro ET, and that there's something to this subject. The problem that you have with Nick is that as a ufologist who does believe that a small proportion of UFO sightings are ET, Nick has been in a position so many times where on live television, which the majority of ufologists never get live TV. He has been on TV so many times, live TV, where he's been asked the question, do you believe in UFOs? And he has always, and steadfastly on mainstream TV, always said no, or I don't know, or he's never given any kind of positive. And over the years he writes positive things, negative things. You know, when we're talking about what we talked about last programme, he'd done a bit and say we're the activist department, you know, which I took exception to.
He could have quite easily, from
with the militant wing of ufology, which was ridiculous things.
He could have taken various speakers' information from that Exopolitics conference and written a very similar article.
Absolutely.
In a positive light, the way that he did. So why this sudden change? Why? What's going on here? Because to me, it does not make sense at all. Is he trying to get back in with the British UFO field, or what?
Well, I think it'd be fair to say that he did damage his reputation when he admitted that he'd made kind of bogus comments about trying to promote, I think, a computer game, which he'd put out initially as mainstream news, and then it turned out later on that he was really just promoting a game. I think.
Well, that's what was said. This is the comment. The very big article in the Mail Online, I think it was, where he was saying that
about the Olympics,
that there's going to be an alien invasion. Or
scenario,
and that there were energy weapons being prepared to defend against a possible alien invasion, and then the cover was that, oh, I was just wanting to promote a video game.
Well, I suppose that in the end, it's for Nick to do what he does. I mean, he has a media career, and he does it the way he wants to do it. All I can say is that, from my point of view, that if you believe in UFOs and that some are ET, then I don't think I could ever change that opinion, whether I'm on TV, radio, whatever. I would have to wear my heart on my sleeve. Unfortunately for Nick, maybe for financial reasons, purely to stay, not nail his colours to the mast, he operates in a way that I couldn't operate, and therefore he appeals to both sides, pro and negative side of the subject. But I couldn't operate that. But here's one of the ironies. I've come across an article, I think he did in 1996 in the old UFO magazine, when he first really got started, and he says he believed that UFOs were ET. Now, he's never said that on national TV, and I find that very odd.
Okay, well, I think we've spoken enough about Nick Pope for one day, Gary. Right now, you are using this opportunity of retirement to launch a new magazine, which I'm very excited about, because we did have UFO Matrix, and I think that's sort of, I'm not even sure if that's still going, but this is going to be an online magazine called UFO Truth magazine. Just tell us about it, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, I came up with the idea in August 2012. I knew by then that I was planning on retiring, wasn't sure exactly what date it would be, but it would be sometime in 2013. And it was as I was about to attend the EXO conference in Liverpool, the 2012 EXO conference in Liverpool. I used the opportunity to put my idea to some of the speakers that were there. And the basic idea is that technology has moved a great deal, in the sense that of, whilst it is very nice to have a magazine, of course it is, but with all the ancillary costs
just hold that up to the camera, Gary, so the camera can see it.
This is actually an Italian publication, put out by Roberto Pinotti. But what I'm saying is, yes, it is nice to have a printed magazine, of course it is, but there's huge costs with printing. But the technology has changed in the sense that people did not used to like reading off a computer screen, scrolling down or whatever. But now with e-readers, Kindle, Kobo, people regularly read on their iPhones, their iPads, etc. People are now happy to read in an online format. So really, your production costs in terms of print aren't necessary. So my idea was to produce an 84-page bi-monthly colour glossy magazine that will look just like that. It will look everything just the same, but it will be in an online, and you can read it on your Kindle, your Kobo, etc. And that will be called UFO Truth magazine.
Well, that's going to cost £4 per issue, or £20 for a 6-month subscription.
Yeah, six issues for the price of 4. Yeah.
And you're intending to bring that out, what, at the end of June for the first issue?
Well, what's going to happen is that in the mid-April, we're having the launch of the website for the magazine, which will then promote, and hopefully by getting on various shows it will announce to the public that there'll be a media campaign to its launch, and the first issue, which will be free, the first issue will go out, will be the May-June issue, and we'll see where we go from there.
Right. So 84 pages, as you said, which is, you know, quite a hefty magazine. Now you've got Anthony Beckett, who's involved with that with you, Gary. Just tell us what he's going to do.
Well, I have a close association with Anthony over the last 3 years, because he's been putting the EXO conferences together in the UK, and he's done a fantastic job. But I mentioned this to him in August and said, look, I want to do a magazine, what do you think? And he thought it was a great idea. And the beauty with Anthony is he's a web designer, so I said, look, would you come up with the magazine website? And he said, yeah, I'd love to get involved in that. So basically it's a tie-up between the two of us. He will run the website for the magazine. Obviously I will have input onto that, but he will effectively look after the design and put that out, and I will edit the magazine. Now the beauty of the magazine is that over the last few months I've been approaching people I respect in the UFO field, various researchers from around the world, to see if they will get on board as columnists for the magazine. And the idea is I want to make it of an international appeal, so I've now got the likes of AJ Javard from Brazil, who does a Brazilian UFO magazine, so he's going to talk about South America. I've got people now in Australia who are going to contribute, New Zealand, exopolitics groups in Denmark, yeah, Pia Knudsen and Kristen Norman in Norway. We're going to feature people like, I recently went to Brazil and met with a lieutenant colonel called Julio Chamorro. Now he's a Brazilian military official. He's going to become a regular contributor, so that's Peru covered, you know. And obviously there'll be a heavy influx of people. Peter Robbins from America is going to be regular. We're going to have guest columnists by the likes of Robert Sellers, Richard Dolan, Grant Cameron, people like that. Yourself, you know, you're going to contribute when you can be asked to write.
Gary's asked me to write 1,000 words every 2 months.
Every 2 months, and he's saying that's going to be difficult. But I didn't realise you were illiterate. But yeah, basically, but there is a main premise of this. These are people who I respect, who have stood the test of time in my eyes as bona fide researchers. The key thing with this magazine that's going to be different from any other magazine, as far as I can see, is one, that I am saying right from the off, this is a magazine for people who believe that some UFOs represent ET contact, that they are visiting the Earth now, that flying saucers are real to intents and purposes. So there's no sitting on the fence. As you know, I've always said this, and this is now an opportunity where I can do it in a more positive way. This is a magazine for UFO believers, that people who believe that ETs are coming to this Earth now. So that's that. There will be a mission statement in that first magazine to that effect. But here's the big difference with my magazine to any others. I want to promote a magazine that self-funds British ufology, that gives us a self-sustaining platform to put on conferences, get venues, speakers, etc. And the reason and how that is done is via the mechanism of having a third of all monies raised. Right. A third of all monies raised will be put aside for UFO projects. Right. Primarily, initially, to secure funding for UK conferences, but as time and as the magazine hopefully grows, if you can imagine a scenario where you had 5,000 subscribers worldwide, then that would generate £100,000. Right. Yeah. Right now, of that, if I'm guaranteeing a third of it will be put to one side for projects, that's £33,000. Now that's going to give us some funding so we can get decent venues, get speakers, pay for costs, etc., and maybe do a travelling roadshow, various things. In time, what I'd like to be also do is to use it a bit like a bank, in the sense that if there's a forensic test needs doing on an animal mutilation case in America and MUFON haven't got the money to do it, then they can approach me and I can make a contribution out of that fund. So it's for the benefit of the subject. I'm not doing it to make loads of money myself, it's to get ufology on the map. And
you're keeping the denialists out of this magazine. I don't even call them debunkers, I call them denialists, because they will deny any evidence regardless of what that evidence is. And my authors that write in some other publications.
Right. What I will say on that is that I've now been an active researcher for now into my 11th year. Now, what I noticed over the years is that most magazines don't really wear the heart on the sleeve. They want to appeal to a wider audience, and that's fine. They say, well, you believe what you want to believe. But for me, this has always been about that in a proportion of the best cases, the evidence is really there. You're just not showing it, and I will be bringing you the best stuff from around the world that says there is a circumstantial evidence that points towards ET. Now, in light of that, I'm not opposed to debate, I'm not opposed to skepticism, but it has to be based on not just a whim, it has to be based on genuine points. And unfortunately with skeptics, a lot of skeptics talk a lot but they don't actually say a lot in hard facts. So fine, I will allow people to write for the magazine if they've got something genuine to say, but it has to be of a proper debate.
Now you mentioned funding conferences, Gary. The Exopolitics conference won't be taking place this year that many Rich Planet viewers have attended over the last few years. We had 2 in Leeds and then 1 in Liverpool this 2012. You think that you may put a conference on linked to UFO Truth magazine, which will possibly replace the Exopolitics conference? Well,
I don't know if it will replace the title Exopolitics per se, because that is something that Anthony Beckett has a dedicated website to, and as you know, the Exopolitics title is pretty much worldwide now in terms of a kind of a brand name in around various countries. And I'm not saying that we take over that, but what I'm saying is that I've discussed it with Anthony, and then conferences are a huge financial I wouldn't say burdens, not the right word, but they are very expensive to produce, and especially when you get in speakers flying in from around the world. Now, what I would say is that it all being well, and we have discussed it, that if the magazine at this stage, as we obviously try to put everything into building it over the next 12 months, that we will probably go down the line of a 1, possibly 2 day, but probably I think a 1 long Saturday or a Sunday, probably a Saturday, perhaps October, maybe November, later on in 2013. Probably in Leeds, but maybe another venue. But the idea is that we'll be up and running by then. It will be generating some cash, which will hopefully fund us venue and whatever. So basically the idea of having the website is that it's going to be self-generating, in the sense that we'll probably put some podcasts out there, maybe put out a weekly or every 2 weeks put a little podcast out there, what's in the next issue, maybe have the odd speaker or two to have a little chat with, but we'll be promoting this heavily, that if this does come out, that there will be a conference.
Right.
So
and the domain name is UFOtruthmagazine.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right then, Gary, well, we'll be talking more about British ufology after this. Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary Heseltine, who has just retired as a police detective now, and is also a UFO researcher. Now, your sort of baby is Rendlesham Forest. You're the main case that you are probably one of the world's leading experts on, which took place in 1980.
Yep.
Are there any new developments, Gary?
Well, there are things that what you've got to appreciate is that when I was in the police, I'm doing my research over and above time as a detective, home life, etc., and the police cases. Now, I've tried to be clear and transparent all the way along and say, you know, if there's any major development, I'll let you know. What I can say is that now I have retired, this next 12 months there will be much greater emphasis on me trying to get directors, producers, production companies involved. But part of that process has been getting the script to a level where I think it's ready to go in a professional sense. Now, along that way, along that journey over the last 5 years, is it's been reviewed by various script writers and things like that. So it has had professional reviews, and they would give advice and whatever. And in the end, I've now got to a stage now where it's pretty much all the advice that I'm getting back now is saying this is pretty much ready to go. And actually we've got two versions now. We've now got a theatrical cinema version, which is more character based, and you develop the characters, because you essentially screen and film is a slightly different media to a documentary. Right. So what we now have is effectively a blow-by-blow account based on my 5 years of research, which is what we would call a docudrama, ready to go for a TV 3 or 4 part series, and now a theatrical version, which is more character driven. Right. Where you can't cover all of the same material for the sake of a film. So some things have come out, but essentially the main aspects are in, but you develop the characters more. Now that's at the stage where I now believe that, along with a development that came out of the Liverpool conference in 2012, a guy called Dave Taylor approached me, who turned out to be a graphic artist. Right. And he has worked for all the top comics. He had a book out last year in the New York Times bestseller list, which was a Batman collaboration book, and he's a brilliant sketch writer, sketch artist. Now he approached me at the conference and said, you know, can I get involved? And I said, well, can you storyboard? Because I've been looking to have my script storyboarded for as an asset, so when you do pitch towards a production company, that you could visualize it and say, look, here's some of the key sequences storyboarded. And he said, yeah, I could do that for you. So that's something that we are currently working on, and this is a major development, because hopefully around the end of April, May, we will be in a position where we've got some of these key sequences storyboarded. So we can go into a presentation now with some storyboard visuals, where we can go with the script, two different versions, theatrical and docudrama TV version, and we can also go in with a business proposal, because essentially we're quite lucky with Rendlesham that the airbase is still there. Albeit it's Bentwaters Park, so
you can film it on site.
So you can film it on site. So the infrastructure is still there, the airbase is still there, the forest is still there, the farmers' field is still there. So in a sense, in terms of costs, all of those things are covered. So you don't need to have a huge budget to make this properly.
So this is a blockbuster Hollywood type film about Britain's most famous UFO case, which took place in 1980, Rendlesham Forest. So and a lot of the characters will be American, which is another sort of selling point if you're going to try and sell it to an American market.
Yeah, you would have thought that in terms of funding, that the fact that it's an American cast effectively on British soil, it would be a plus point. But
just to touch on the funding, Gary, you're sort of going, if cap in hand, if you like, to production people, Hollywood, whatever. Have you got an approximate cost of how much it would cost to produce? Are you talking 4 million? Are you talking 10 million? Have you got a figure? I mean, a typical, medium-ish budget film, you're talking £5 million, aren't you? But if you could get that budget, you don't necessarily have to appeal to TV and film people. You could just appeal to someone who's got a spare £5 million in their pocket, and then commission the production people yourself.
Well, it'd be nice if there's a rich benefactor who goes, yes, I want to see this.
Have you got a figure?
No. Well, if you remember last year, I did do a presentation to a small production company, and they basically loved it. But I think the bottom line was it was a bit out of their range. They weren't able to get the finance together, but one of the things that they were quoting was between £5 and £10 million. And I kind of think that that's the kind of budget you are looking at.
Well, you never know who's watching the show, Gary, so for anyone who's got a spare £5 to £10 million who wants to put it into making what could be one of the best films to come out of Britain, about a true story, a phenomenal story, you never know.
Well, what I would say on that is that, you know, it'd be nice if there were these.
Then you're in control. Then you see.
Well,
you're not.
Alas, I don't think it'll be
twiddling with the script.
No, absolutely. But the bottom line is that I've said all along that It's not about making loads of money for me, it's about getting the truth out there. Now, you do have this problem that when you go to production companies and finance, whatever, you end up basically, you will have to sell the script and then they can maim it, which is usually what happens. Now, one of the ways that we're trying to do it is that over the years I've met fair few people who do have media links. Now, for example, Dave Taylor, without naming his sources, there's obviously quite a tie-up between comics being made into feature films, and there still are. So he knows people within the media industry, film and TV. So it may well be that the best way we can move this forward is by putting the script to various people, and I know he is promoting it now, and he has got some people interested in it, and basically we will cut through so many layers if we can get to somebody who is like head of TV that he may know, who reads it and goes, this is great, we can go down the docudrama side, and I'll put you in touch with people there. It may well be that we know certain actors, and if you can get to a prominent actor and an actress, a famous actor says, I like this, I want to get involved, he will know the people to go to. So that's the kind of route that we go into. But what I'm saying is that this year will be, from my point of view, a major emphasis where I now go out actively seeking to get this made into a film.
I still think you might get the break from a private individual. For example, George Harrison, he funded films just because he believed in and then he left them alone. You know,
well, you have this kind of you know, Robbie Williams kind of scenario that he turns up at UFO conferences a few years ago, things like that. But to my mind, if that happens, great. Some people have got lots of money out there, and certainly what I would say is that this is going to be the most famous UFO case probably ever to hit the screen, and we have an opportunity to do it right, and it'll be based on truth. If I can be in anywhere in that process, then that's what I'm going to try to guarantee. Now, it's not, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, and I'm not saying there probably won't be script changes, but what I'm saying is that essentially this story is going to get it out unmangled, and it's such a good story that it is, whether I'm involved or not, it is going to be made into a feature film. But we do have an opportunity now that if we can attract the right investor, director, whatever, there's a real chance for Hollywood or for British film industry to do something historic by telling the best story in the best way and telling it as it really was.
Have you got a particular actor in mind who you'd want to play Holt? Because he's not the central character, but a major character.
Well, he essentially Holt has to be the major character, along with one or two others, for the simple reason is that this is effectively a story which at the heart of it has been endorsed, and he put his name to the Holt Memorandum, which I believe is Britain's most famous UFO document and one of the world's most famous UFO documents, because somebody of his rank, the deputy base commander of a nuclear facility, which we know it was, is saying that I saw UFOs myself, and he describes that in the third paragraph, and in the first two paragraphs he describes that of a landed craft. Well, that document is priceless. We don't ever have that in Roswell in the same way, and nobody disputes the fact that that's a real document. And one of the beauties, and it's often lost, is the fact that Rendlesham Forest should have never have come out. Holt tried to get it pulled when he knew it was coming out, because he knew his life would never be the same.
Do you know how old Holt was in 1980?
Off the top of my head, I would think he would be in his late 30s, early 40s.
Late 30s, right. Maybe Tom Hanks or someone like that.
Well, in the end, the bottom line is you can get, you know, you're looking for the story to be treated by the production company director as serious. This is not going to be an Independence Day, because I wouldn't get involved in that kind of process. This has got to be telling it how it was, and the real men's experiences, and the fact that people's lives have been shattered often afterwards, and people still have all these questions that have never been resolved. And whilst we don't know 100% of what occurred, because it is complicated, we probably know about 70% of what's occurred. And if you put those 70 jigsaw pieces together in a 100-piece jigsaw, you'd end up with E.T.
Right. All right, and Gary. Well, you collect UFO cases from police officers. Over the last 2.5 years, I've been doing the same, not from police officers, but from the general public. I've got a reporting mechanism, and I've eventually gotten round to actually studying. I've got about 350 reports in total, and I've been...
Yeah, I get copies of them.
I've been whittling them down, and I've interviewed quite a lot.
There are some very good cases in there.
Yeah. Now, I would say I've got maybe around about 40 in total of people who've seen these flying triangles, usually black. They're usually completely silent. People often see them at very close range. And they seem to come in 2 different sizes. So the size of a football field, which is people find difficult to believe, but you'd be amazed how many people report this. And the sort of 30 to 40 foot silent flying triangle. So one reason why I've come here today is to pick Gary's brains, because we're going to do another interview after this, just to get a flavour for some of your flying triangle cases, and also the other thing that people report bizarrely is spherical orbs. Sometimes in the day they're seen as metallic, reflective orbs that
sometimes translucent,
that are often intelligently controlled and change direction, so they're clearly not sort of balloons and that kind of thing.
I've seen one myself.
Right.
And I'll talk you.
Okay. So could you just give us a general comment on the black triangle phenomenon, Gary? Just an overview of it in your own eyes, without me actually putting words in your mouth, from your own research.
When I look at the cases on the database, which now we're looking at, and I'm just doing the 10th report, based on last year's research. When I look at those cases, we're looking at now over 440 cases, going back to 1901. What I would say is that the majority of sightings break down into classic shapes, sometimes saucer, sometimes cylindrical, sometimes just a bright white light, sometimes orb, sometimes triangle. Now, there is certainly, since the I should say from 1980 onwards, more police sightings coming in with triangular, and I will certainly highlight some police cases that have come in of objects that are the size of 3 football fields, triangular, low to the ground, no noise, that have been witnessed by multiple police officers that are on the database. So the certainly the triangular platform has been around probably since about 1980.
Yeah, I would concur with that, because I think the earliest triangle that I've got is 76, and I think that was in Devon. But certainly, I think I was speaking to Dave Hodrian, and he was saying that the amount of saucer sightings seems to have decreased, but the triangle sightings have increased. Now, a lot of people put forward the argument that triangles, they're all military secret craft. Give me a comment on that.
Well, I suppose in theory you could say that they could be, and ultimately we don't know for certain. But what I would say to that is, let's look at the flight characteristics, and the flight characteristics of something that we're saying is built, huge dimensions. Say, if the case 1 football field size, like in the case that I'm thinking of, 3 football field size, this is a huge aerial platform. Now, how does it move? Does it make any noise? Well, invariably most UFO sightings of this kind of craft come back no noise whatsoever, even at low altitude, 50 feet, 100 feet, no noise whatsoever. But you're talking about the huge dimensions of a craft. So how could that be? Objects are often seen to make instant acceleration, instant stop, to make right angle turns and things like that. Well, those kind of flight characteristics just can't be borne by any stealth weapon that's an aircraft
that's been disclosed so far.
No, and I agree, and that's why I say in the end we can't be certain. But what you've got to think of is, well, what country could produce a football field size object with those kind of flight characteristics? The only one you could realistically say is probably America, with its money and finances. And then you think, well, why is it flying over Northolt in the UK and Middlesex? Why is it flying over football field so that the police officers that witness it can say, well, it's the size of 3 football fields. How do you know that? Because it was over 3 football fields, and that low.
So do you have have you got enough of those cases to say where they predominantly occur, or?
I haven't delved in a geographical, regional basis to do that, but that's something that I will have more time to do. I mean, what I was going to say to you anyway is, with regards to your sightings, I want to include those sightings in the magazine, if I may, because you've been copying me into them, and obviously I don't want to tread on your toes where you're doing documentaries and things like that, but you know, if we get a sighting report in and it's good, then we should be able to put it in, and maybe not put the name in or whatever, but essentially the stories are there, and the follow-up can happen later. Because there will be a section on UK sightings, you see, and this is a ready source.
Over the last, as I say, 2.5 years, I've had about 350 reports, and of that I've got a database now of around about 160, because I've discarded I discard over half, actually, because they're generally, you can Chinese lanterns, the usual explicable things, which I will go into in my upcoming talk, because I'm doing a full.
But some of them have got so much information, and they say describing an object that'll suddenly rise vertically into the sky, or drop vertically to the ground, or make a right angle turn, or is zigzagging around the sky. Well, we know from our research over the years is that planes can't do that. There's nothing mankind, as far as we're aware, can do that kind of technology, those kind of flight characteristics. So we think that they're genuine ET, and until somebody tells us otherwise, I think that is the case.
Okay. I am looking also into which again I'm sort of promoting my upcoming tour, speaking tour, which all of my sort of analysis of 2.5 years of UFO reports will be in my upcoming talks, and I am looking at different alleged propulsion systems other than the ones that are currently known about, ones that have possibly been secretized, which might explain some characteristics. And I've got a little project going, which I'll tell you about after this interview. But we're probably going to discuss a couple of specific cases, triangle, which will be included in my upcoming tour. But thanks for speaking to us today, Gary, and good luck with the UFO Truth magazine. We'll be promoting it on RichPlanet TV.
I hope so.
I'll promise on camera that I'll give you 1,000 words every 2 months.
Thank you very much. You've got it on camera.
So it just remains for me to say, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.
It's going to be quite bizarre, and I'm still getting used to it, but this is effectively going to be where I'm going to work from home, and there'll be a number of things that we'll discuss to do with UFOs.
Now then, is it true to say that you were under certain restrictions when you were working as a police officer pertaining to your UFO research?
Yes, I mean, I can now reveal which force I belonged to, which was the British Transport Police, and I worked for them between 1989 and 2013. Initially, when I began my UFO research in January 2002, I told the force what I was going to do, and I operated without any restrictions whatsoever. However, after about 5 years, the first inklings of interference came in, when I was told that I couldn't stay what my collar number was, that basically they were beginning to come down and say, look, we don't really want you mentioning which force you belong to, And I would say, well, why? Because I said, it's gone all around the world and translated on the internet into many languages. You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
So is this just verbal then, Gary? We don't like you mentioning British Transport Police.
Initially it was verbal, and then
Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today I've come to speak to Gary Heseltine. Now, last time I spoke to you, Gary, you were a serving police detective, and I understand there's been a minor change in your life.
Not just a minor change, it's a major change. I've just recently retired from the police. I finished on the 31st of March, so now for the first time I can devote all of my energies into ufology, which is something I wanted to do for a long time, but circumstances have arisen that has meant that I can bring retirement forward a couple of years, and that's what I've done. So that's what I'm going to do.
We're sitting in your new place of work.
Yes, just to say, look, I do know things about data protection and things like the other. I told them that I had an unofficial national database and that I was writing to them in an unofficial capacity. And basically I was drawing their attention to the fact that the MOD closed its desk and they were going to have people ringing in, and that they needed to have some kind of strategy to deal with it.
So just interrupt you there, Gary. So if someone came into a police station and said, I've just seen a massive UFO, what would then happen? Would that eventually trickle its way up to the MOD then?
It should do. I mean, I would say the majority would have probably come via telephone rather than somebody going in, but yes, that is a possibility. But basically whoever dealt with it, whichever police officer or whichever civilian control room operator dealt with it, they should have then recorded it on a form, a questionnaire form which was supplied to them by the MOD. They would fill in the form and then they would submit that to the MOD within 24 hours, who would then collate them. Now,
so a lot of these reports would have a police officer's name on them then?
The person who was submitting the report, obviously, yes. How it's transpired is that through the Freedom of Information Act, this ongoing release of documents, all the actual names are taken out for public release. But at the time it went in, if Mr. Smith came in and did a report, then the PC Smith or whoever dealt with it would put his name to the fact that they've recorded this report from this civilian. They may even take a statement, and then it would be sent off to the MOD for them to do with whatever. That was the standard procedure. Really? Now,
so I'll interrupt you again, guys. So was that written into some police procedural document that if someone had an unidentified object,
some forces
that it would go to the MOD?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was written into most forces that there was a standard procedure to follow. I.e., they fill in the report and that goes off to the MOD. Because this can be borne out by the fact that in many of the police officer cases that I've researched since and that have come from the Freedom of Information Act, you'll actually have the statement from the officers saying, I wish to bear notice that I'm so-and-so of this force, and on this day I took a statement from a civilian called blah 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 regarding a UFO experience in accordance with blah blah blah, standing order blah blah blah.
So before you go on and explain what happened to you, I just want to ask you, so when the MOD said, nah, we're not taking any more reports, we're not interested in UFO reports anymore, did they in
2008 it took a more dramatic turn, or rather 2009 it took a more dramatic turn, when the MOD suddenly announced late in 2009 that they were going to close its UFO desk. Now, I immediately thought, well, what are they going to do with all the reports that they were going to get? And the majority of those would come from police, through police stations.
Right.
People ringing into police stations have seen something, they would pass the report to the MOD, which is the system that had kind of operated for nigh on 50 years. And in this day and age, I thought, well, they have to be seen to be professional. You can't just palm people off like maybe had been done in the past. They would have to deal with it professionally. So what were they going to do? So I saw that that was a perfect opportunity to write to all the chief constables of Britain with a view to saying, well, you may not be aware of this because it's probably low down on your priorities, but this has happened and it will have an impact on your force. So what I actually did was I wrote to 38 of the 43 police chief constables and said that I was an off-duty police officer. I said which force I belonged to, and I did that